I'm Jane Hansen, and this week in the arena, from New York to Washington to the Vatican, we are taking a brief look at the issues that have you, the viewers, talking. As we wind up another season of In the Arena, we want to take a look at some of the news headlines, past, present, and future, that have everyone's attention. Joining us, Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our regular contributors, Elizabeth Scalia, author of the blog The Anchoress and contributor to First Things, and Grant Gallicho, Associate Editor of Commonweal magazine. Thank you all for being here and agreeing to chat yet another time. So I don't think we can talk about issues confronting the Catholic Church without talking about the Pope and the sexual abuse scandal. And he has, it seems, really been confronting it in ways he never has before. And I'm wondering if this is a sign the Vatican is really on the offensive.
I don't know if I agree that he's confronting things in ways he hasn't before. He's done quite a lot since the CDF took providence over the abuse issues in 2001, and certainly since becoming Pope. We don't talk enough about the good things that have been done in terms of policies that have been put in place, the effectiveness of those policies, the fact that I think Monsignor can say there have been 6 credible cases of abuse in the last couple of years. Anything that is reported now is soundly responded to very quickly. It used to be, as Timothy Dolan said, we used to have the worst policies. Now we have the best, and we're not talking enough about that. I think to say that Benedict is doing things he hasn't done before is not quite accurate.
I think we have talked in this program, though, and it might have been you, Grant, that brought it up, that saying the Vatican really needs to figure out how to deal with this in a way that is maybe, to your point, is showing exactly what is being done.
Yeah,
maybe
they
that
communicate very badly. It's amazing that the Catholic Church has managed to communicate anything the way the Vatican works. I can't imagine how Paul ever got his letters delivered.
Well, it is. I mean, you have every curial official has his own little fiefdom, and I think you're seeing that play out. Different cardinals are saying different things. They're not all on the same message. And I think that makes it harder for the Pope to speak out and say maybe what he really wants to say. What he said in the past, it seems to me he's actually addressed the abuse scandal more directly when he came to the States. Remember when he spoke on the plane?
And in Australia also.
Yes. And so now I find it strange that we're getting these sort of oblique references to sin and penance. But he hasn't. Well, he hasn't said penance for what.
Let's be fair. I mean, I don't think there's any question that the Pope has addressed this situation head on, at least in recent days. So he has addressed the issue head on. I think there is no question when you start raising that we have to be ever vigilant in the protection of children. And in fact, the United States since 2002 has really been very, very vigilant in instituting programs to protect children, whether it's background checks of all our employees, training and child protection of all our employees, and in addition to all our employees, also all children who are involved in contact with the church get trained in terms of to be able to speak up when they feel that they've been placed in an uncomfortable place. So, I mean, in terms of what we're doing to protect children, I don't think anybody can meet the standard that the Catholic Church is holding out forth now. And the amount of resources that the Catholic Church is placing into those programs. At the same time, I think there's nobody who has learned more about this problem than the Catholic Church. I mean, the John Jay study, Causes and Context, seeking to understand what has happened here. Why did this happen? I think that the Catholic Church is really committed to trying to understand this problem, to prevent it, to understand it. And the third thing I would say is trying to address those who are survivors of abuse. And I think that that's something that the Catholic Church, again, is very, very much focused on, and not a lot of other institutions in society. So the Holy Father addressed that, I think, in these last days, and I think we're going to continually hearing him address it, because when he speaks about leading a sinner church, a humble church, a suffering church, a shameful church, I think that that's clear that he has gotten the message. And one thing I would just say at the end is, we kind of have a notion that, that the Pope is like you or me, and that he sits at home and reads the newspaper and watches TV and is aware of all the things that are happening as they're unfolding. In some sense, you can almost be a prisoner of your office. You're dependent on other people to share information with you, to let you know what is happening around the world. And rightly or wrongly, I suspect that a lot of that information was not making its way to the Holy Father. And as soon as that information was being communicated, it didn't take too long for him to begin speaking about it and addressing it in a forthright manner.
That may be true, but it's hard for me to believe that theory, because when he was running the CDF, he was the one who really started to steer the ship in the right direction, because his eyes were opened to the reality of this crisis.
But when his spokesman in the midst of the crisis says, I haven't spoken to the Pope in 3 weeks, there seems to be an indication that this is not an issue where he is being briefed on daily, the impact, the scope of this. And I think that maybe that's the problem that really needs to be addressed at the Vatican right now. And I think you're 100% right. Clearly, there were a lot of different messages that were coming out from sources in the Vatican, and they weren't really very helpful. I mean, we really didn't need some misstatements coming from high-ranking curial officials. And, part of the problem there is, possibly, is that maybe things were getting lost in translation. I suspect not, but it is a possibility.
Okay, but let's look at this seriously. There were newspaper headlines all around the world. We saw them here in the United States. There were some people who were saying, well, maybe the church is under attack in a certain front from the media. And yet the end, so how can the Pope not see that?
Well, first off, I can tell you this. I don't think that the church, and Pope Benedict has said this, and I think it's clear, right, in paraphrasing, that the media is not responsible for this crisis.
Right.
We're responsible. The Catholic Church is responsible for this crisis. Leadership of the Catholic Church, the priests who committed these crimes against children, we're responsible. I do think there's really not too much of a question that the media has exploited this crisis.
The media
and
doesn't
I think
do much to report what we've done on the good side. They only report the negative. They emphasize the negative.
And that's their job. So I give them,
Okay.
that's their job. I don't begrudge them their job. But the thing that I find where the exploitation is the amount of resources, the attention that was devoted to this crisis in the Catholic Church, in relation to everything that's happening in the broader society and the rest of the world, seems to be disproportionate. That's where I think that they were.
Couldn't you have made the same argument back in 2002 when the Gagin story started to get going in Boston, and that was front page story in Boston for days, weeks,
Except
months?
there was nothing really new here. Nothing new to the extent that there was in 2002. In 2002, there was, a practical effect of 2002, of course, was the Dallas Charter and the steps that was
Although
taken.
even in 2002, most of those cases were old cases.
Yes, but the difference
Although
is,
many of those priests, even those priests, many priests had been serving in ministry and had then been placed on administrative leave. So, what didn't happen, and the media had gotten this wrong, was that priests would just move from one place, shuttled back and forth. What happened prior to 2002 is a lot of priests had been put into treatment, had been monitored, had been supervised. It's important to note that 3%, and Grant, we were talking about this earlier, right? 3% of the priests are responsible for about 25% of the abuse cases. So, these guys were monsters. These guys were monsters. Those were the egregious cases that were handled poorly. The other 75% of the cases, you were dealing with something very different.
So if you take a look, though, at the coverage of what happened in Malta recently when the Pope made a visit and met with, how many was it, 8? Victims of sexual abuse. Some of the coverage of that was very poignant, very compelling, and probably, I think, very dutiful in a certain sense about what the church is. You're smiling at me like, what is she talking about?
No, I'm always tumbling over my teeth. I'm just glad to see a professional do it.
I think that shows the power that the Pope has. As a media figure, by virtue of his office, by virtue of his personal holiness, that if when he makes those kinds of gestures, those important gestures, he gets the kind of coverage that presumably bishops would prefer. And you saw it when he came to the States and he met with, I forget, 6 or 7 victims. When he went to Australia, I believe he also met with victims. This is a very powerful thing. And it's difficult as just a regular Catholic squaring that act with some of the statements that were coming from other curial officials.
Well, using a term like petty gossip. Now again, maybe that was lost in translation, but that was really not a helpful. That was not a helpful characterization. In fact, not only was it not helpful, I think it was hurtful. So I think that the Pope has made it clear that he doesn't agree with that. He doesn't agree with that characterization, and I think that his actions, his words, I think that the continuity of his life is sort of speaking to that he gets it. Since really 2002, when the CDF was
It
placed.
just seems to me that the Curia needs to shut up and let Benedict be Benedict, because when he speaks, even when he speaks off the cuff, as he did in Malta, that was an impromptu sermon that he gave when he talked about penance and acts of penance. If you read the whole sermon, it was very beautiful, and it was spontaneous. And I think if you just let him be him, it can bring an awful lot of the good to the fore.
And
there's an
maybe-
awful lot of obfuscation going on.
Yeah,
I
and
just
maybe-
tumbled over my teeth.
That's okay. And maybe there's a reason why God has made him the Pope right now to deal with this particular crisis at this point in time.
Ross Duluth wrote a very, very, very good article in the New York Times op-ed piece about Pope Benedict, and really saying how this Pope has done more than anybody else in the Church to protect children, to really address this problem in a serious manner. And unfortunately, he's not going to receive the sort of credit for it that he deserves.
Certainly this will be a topic that will be discussed into the rest of this year, but for now we are going to take a break. And when we come back in just a moment, we are going to continue this conversation. We've got a lot of other subjects to deal with, so stay with us. Welcome back as we continue our discussion. Lots of other hot topics that are going on. I know that the subject of immigration is very dear to your heart, and particularly in this Diocese of Brooklyn. What do you think about this law that's been passed in Arizona?
Yeah, I think that there are certain components of this law which I think that maybe we could get behind. I think an ID card maybe would be a good initiative if there was if something on a national basis, a card that would be a national ID card. I think that could be helpful. At the same time, the thought of picking up day laborers and having police officers throw them in jail, that's very, very troubling.
I want to talk just to fill people in about what this law is. It's one of the toughest pieces of immigration legislation in the country, and it would require that these alien registration documents be carried at all times, requires police to question people if there's a reason to suspect that they are in the U.S. illegally, and it will target those who hire illegal immigrant day laborers or knowingly transport them. So, I mean, we were talking earlier about when we were kids, there was this card that people filled out.
The alien address card.
The alien address card, which always sounded to me like somebody was there from outer
Right,
space.
right.
But how politically correct is something like that in today's era?
I think this law is very, it has its good points and its bad points, as Karen says, but it scares me overall because of this whole sense of authority clamping down and stopping people in the street saying, show me your papers. Growing up as we did in that whole Cold War, it just rubs me the wrong way. I don't like it.
There is a challenge on the immigration front. I think that at one and the same time, the nation does need to protect its borders. It does need to have control over who can come into the country, who can go out of the country. That is something which is important. The state needs to have control of that. At the same time, the fact is that we have tens of millions of American people who are living in America, working in America, paying taxes in America, because it's important to know that undocumented people are still usually have a tax ID number, so they're paying Social Security taxes, federal taxes, sales taxes. So they are paying taxes. So this nonsense that undocumented people are not paying taxes is crazy. They are paying taxes. At the same time, I think that there is a concern that people who are here, we need to know who is in the country. And I think that's entirely appropriate.
But I think there's a huge capacity for abuse there.
Right.
Especially when the law states that the local authorities, so police officers, state troopers, are empowered to enforce these laws. They can stop someone, for being brown-skinned while driving. It's a really frightening prospect, and I don't think it's particularly American.
And that's happening already, as we know.
And of course, part of it is this country was built on immigrants, and we have this whole concept of now that we're become so embroiled in an economic recession that now all of a sudden we want to say people can't be here. I mean,
Well,
I'm not suggesting
Jane, one thing I would just take issue with is, listen, I think that there are some important things that need to be done. I think we could do the DREAM Act. I think there does have to be a path to legalization for people who are here and are undocumented. I agree with all that. However, I do think that, you know, you can't have unfettered immigration in the United States. And, you know, we're not, no, I don't think that the church, the bishops are proposing, you know, open borders, amnesty. I think they're reasonable controls. Unfortunately, this is becoming so politicized that, you know, that it's difficult to get any real immigration reform done. And one thing that's important to note is John Cornyn, who was the single most responsible United States senator for killing immigration, won his re-election with 47% of Hispanic voters.
That's a pretty amazing statistic. So speaking of things being politicized, let's talk about what's coming forward in the elections next fall. We've got a few months to ponder it, but as of right now, what would your kind of predictions be, given how everything is so polarized at the moment between the Democrats and the Republicans?
I think the Democrats are going to lose several seats, but not as many as the Republicans would like. I think.
Well, that's never the case. They'd like them to lose them all.
I think as information rolls out about healthcare and now what's happening on Wall Street, which is a very popular issue right now, clamping down on the abuses of large financial institutions, I think that is going to help stem some of the losses that were predicted months ago.
Grant is part of the Chicago mafia that wants to move the derivatives market from New York, which provides about 40% of tax revenues for our city, to Chicago, where this legislation that the president is proposing will likely do.
And it just happens to be his hometown.
Yeah, his hometown. So, I mean, I suspect that, in fact, the Democrats will probably be about 53 seats in the Senate. So they will lose significant number of seats, I think, and I think that they can lose upwards of 20-plus seats in the House of Representatives. I think that there is going to be a real backlash, and contrary to what Grant proposes, I think that as people are becoming aware of some of the implications of health insurance reform, I think that a lot of seniors, I think a lot of the impact on Medicare, I think that the impact that seniors are going to feel, I think there's going to be, rightly or wrongly, I think there's going to be a backlash, and I think that the president's administration is going to suffer, especially because...
I think that politically, you're right that there's a risk there, but I think it's too soon for that to have the electoral effect that you're predicting.
What, the health bill effect?
That the potential cuts in Medicare.
Well, you're proposing that people are going to feel positive about the bill. Well, there are not going to be enough people who are going to have strong feelings about the bill at the moment to kind of bring them over the top. And there are a lot of people who feel very strongly in opposition to the bill.
Because the things that kick in immediately are the ones that hit people. You can't be kicked off your policy, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's very popular.
I can tell this is something that starts to get him fired up. Okay, come on, Elizabeth. We haven't heard from you.
I have no predictions to make. I think both parties are chumps. Both parties overplay their hands every time they think they've got a winning hand. And I just want to continue talking about immigration, actually, because I really think I'm thinking about what Kieran just said, and I'm thinking nothing can be done, nothing can be fixed if we're not actually reconfiguring the National Immigration Service, which is completely broken and needs to be redone.
But you know what the problem is I think that trying to do an overarching big fix is really not going to happen because politically it suits both parties not to get something done. However, there are some things like the DREAM Act, allowing allowing kids who basically have grown up in the United States to go to college and find a way to citizenship, people who've served in the military to be able to become citizens. I mean, this is wildly popular.
I think that is wild, that people can serve in our military and not be allowed to be citizens.
Become a citizen.
Right.
I mean, they've awarded
it was a path to citizenship in ancient times.
But I was online at the Ellis Island thing. I was looking up my grandfather because I suspect my grandfather was whacked by the mob, and I want to find this out. And
that'll be on the next show.
And I found the ship manifest where he came in. And I thought to myself, why don't we have some sort of Ellis Island West going on? Why aren't we building some sort of Ellis Island, some sort of facility, some way for people to be processed in properly?
Well, that is a good concept. But we are out of time, and we have to take a break. We're going to continue this conversation. Got a couple more subjects to discuss when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Continuing our conversation on the issues that have had you talking, we're joined once again by Monsignor Kieran Harrington, who is the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, Elizabeth Scalia, contributor to First Things and author of the blog The Anchoress, and Grant Gallicho, the Associate Editor of Commonweal magazine. Okay, everybody's talking about the candidates to become the new Supreme Court Justice, and of course the President has a long list of potential candidates. What do you guys think is the most important thing for a new Supreme Court nominee? Not that he's going to listen to you, but what do you think?
I think that you really need somebody who is going to, and I think we're going to get this actually. I think someone who is going to be a center left moderate. I think that they're not going to be able to replace somebody on the court as liberal as John Paul Stevens. They're not going to get we're not going to get somebody who I would love to see, someone like Justice Roberts, Justice Alito, Justice Scalia. So I don't think we're going to find that. I think you're going to get a center-left moderate, and anybody's going to be better than John Paul Stevens who we get. And I'm grateful that the Democrats don't have a supermajority, which is going to ensure that.
But the President made it very clear that the issue of abortion is not up for discussion.
Well, I mean, to show how disingenuous his remarks were, he said that there is not a litmus test on the issue of abortion, but any candidate that he proposes for the bench, he went on to say, will be a staunch defender of women's rights.
You know what? I appreciated that he actually was upfront about that. I'm a little tired of the last 20 years, every president saying there won't be a litmus test, and I'm going to pretend I don't know what this person...
He said there was not going to be a litmus
No,
test.
no,
And
no,
then
but then carrying
everybody
forward
knows
with
that
this charade that
when
they don't know...
when you're sworn in, they put a chip in your head, and when it comes time to name a potential Supreme Court justice, you go, it's not. I don't have any litmus tests.
But because the Supreme Court justices are there for so long, their tenures can be, well, in this case, what is
Life.
it?
Right.
Yeah.
Life. Death.
Really, I think that presidents really do believe that these appointees to the Supreme Court are one of the most important parts of their legacy
absolutely.
that will exist.
This appointee, John Paul Stevens, was appointed by Ford.
Right. Well, he was
this
more
is how-
conservative,
yeah.
and this is a classic story. I mean, a lot of Supreme Court justices travel, and from conservative to liberal, liberal to
So there are no guarantees for the president when he
No,
appoints
no,
them.
certainly
Absolutely
isn't.
not.
Listen,
Lined
I
up.
mean, David Souter was a Bush appointee. He was thought to be a conservative appointee. He turned out to be one of the most liberal members of the court.
So let's talk about some of the potential candidates. Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, the appeals judge from Montana, Sidney Thomas, Michigan governor. I mean, who do you guys think is going to be named?
I think Elena Kagan is going to be named, and I really would prefer to see her over Janet Napolitano.
I absolutely think you're crazy if you think that Elena Kagan is going to be named.
Because
I think that because of recent revelations about her sexual orientation, it would be extraordinarily difficult for her to get through a nomination process. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just do not think that's going to happen.
How does that play out? She's going to be sitting there in front of the Senate panel,
Are
and
you,
they're
or
going
have you ever
to
been
ask her about her.
I just
sexual
don't think it's going to
orientation?
happen. I don't think she's going to get the nomination.
that brings up the whole subject of gay marriage, because ultimately that's going to be before the Supreme Court, and I think that would be the concern of all those people who might be opposing
Yes, I mean
her
that's how
nomination.
the political battle would play out. I'm sure there would be a lot of PAC money funneled into ads in various places, but
Do you think that Democrats are looking for this fight
No.
and this issue in
we
this election?
We know
Absolutely
that.
not.
I mean, they've studied the Clinton mistakes. They're not
doing this.
Yeah, no, I know.
So make a prediction. Who do you think it'll be?
I'm not going to make that prediction. I'm going to say it's going to be a woman, and as the Monsignor said, it's going to be a center left.
What about Diane Wood? She's an appeals judge as well. Her name has been prominently mentioned.
I'm not naming anyone.
Come
Jane, you
on.
can't make me do it.
Elizabeth?
Honestly, I haven't been following it that much. I've been following the Elena Kagan story, and I like her. Even though I don't like all of her positions, I don't like her pro-abortion position, I still think that she seems like a level-headed and fair person.
And let's talk about it just from the church's perspective. Who would be the perfect
I'm
of those mentioned?
I'm going out on a limb, Jane, and I'm going to tell you that the next Supreme Court
Ted
justice
Olson.
is going to be a Protestant. I'm going to make this prediction right now because 5 justices are Catholic, 3 are Jewish, the Protestants need one appointment. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say one Protestant on the court.
So
Okay.
you're saying you prefer having a Protestant on the court? That's what I'm hearing.
Mainline Protestant or evangelical?
All right, we've got to wrap up for the season. We've got a minute left. If you could just say one quick thing of what you think the most important thing for people watching to think about is, and each one of you, just a quick thought about what message you'd love to leave them with.
I think that the important thing for all of us is that our faith has an impact on the way in which we live our life, and hopefully this show is a way from which we can take a look at our faith, understanding our faith, and see how does that then translate into the issues that we've been talking about all these many weeks. You know, whether it's life issues, end of life issues, whether it's education issues, whether it's Supreme Court. That somehow my faith impacts my worldview and impacts how I live my life. And I think that that's what's the value of this show, and I hope that that's something we've done.
Grant?
I don't think I could add much to that. I'll just make the Commonweal magazine standard pitch, which is engagement. And that's just another way of restating your excellent summary.
And Elizabeth, the last word from you.
Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid of prayer. Don't be afraid of penance. Don't be afraid to love. Don't be afraid to trust Christ.
And don't be afraid to let us know what you're thinking about, because we would love to have your reaction and have your encouragement so we can continue these kinds of discussions. Grant, thank you so much. Elizabeth, Monsignor, and thank you all for being with us. And remember that you don't need a TV to watch the net. We are always online at www.netny.net. For all of us here, I'm Jane Hanson. We'll see you next time in the arena.